For our first parter of our two-part Q&A, where we will be taking all of your history questions, social studies topics, things you want to discuss related to all things history, social studies, geopolitics, past and present geography, where we do everything we can do to answer your questions about history and social studies. It's what we do on this channel. We've been doing this for a few months now. Usually we're only doing it, at first we only started doing it on Saturdays, but then we branched out to doing it Saturdays and Sundays, and then eventually we decided to add a live stream Q&A on Friday nights to start off your weekend the right way. We're coming to you live at 8:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have a live stream lecture every Sunday as well. So 3 live streams back to back to back every weekend. You guys can really, really enjoy it. Come and ask history questions on Friday and Saturday. And tune in on Sundays when I bring you information about an important historical topic where you guys can have fun in the chat with the help of my wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny, who has already put my social media handles in the chat. So please follow me on those social medias. Consider liking and subscribing. Becoming a friendly neighborhood historian has never been easier. It's just liking and subscribing. All of that good stuff. So on Fridays, we answer your questions and your comments, your topics, whatever history you want to bring up and talk about is the history that I will be discussing with you guys as best as I possibly can. And then on Saturday, we're going to be doing the same thing, a second parter. And then Sundays, we will be doing the live stream lecture where I will be discussing topics that are important that I think maybe somebody brought up in the chat, or maybe somebody asked me about it in channel when they were watching one of my many, many shorts or some of my long form videos, which I suggest you go and check out, please. Somebody might have brought that up in the chat and wanted to know a little bit about a particular topic, and therefore that gives me inspiration. Like we were inspired last week. I'm trying to remember who it was who brought up I think it was James T. Kirk, who brought up the importance of the Roman Republic and understanding the whole history of the Roman Republic. So, and that's not something that I can talk about in just a few minutes answering a question. So we decided to put that off, and on Sunday during our live stream lecture at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be discussing the importance and history of the Roman Republic, its founding, its legacy, how it worked and functioned, and how it inspired later republics, and how it changed politics and government forever. So join us this Sunday when I delve into the history of the Roman Republic and all of that good stuff there. Now we got a little bit brighter. So basically, we will be answering your historical questions for the next hour or so. This is what we do every Friday night, every Saturday night, and then Sundays we have a live stream lecture. So always good to see everybody. Really appreciate all the support, and be sure to say hi to my wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny, who always does such a great job of hanging on. I have been fighting back a bit of a fever. I had some bad stomach problems yesterday, and so I'm fortunately on the mend, and so if my voice sounds a little off or different than it normally does, that is the explanation for it, but I promise to bring you quality historical content as I feel better and I'm ready to go. I almost canceled the live stream lecture last Sunday because of I was tired, but we had it and it went excellent. So, yeah, so thank you. Russian Agent, always good to see you. Global is here. I hope he's still here. We are literally Friday the 13th, so it's an unlucky Friday, so a lot of stuff going on there. And I should do a history video on why 13 is an unlucky number. We've got 7 as a lucky number. Maybe it's because 13 is right before 14, which is a multiple of 7, and 7 has always been kind of a lucky or perfect, important number in history in different societies and cultures. There's a certain of a unanimity about 7. So who knows? 13, a baker's dozen, has always been considered unlucky for whatever reason, and so Friday the 13th has not only become associated with bad luck, but also with horror, violence, death, and decay. Obviously, as seen best in the Friday the 13th horror series. So, yeah. So Russian Agent is asking our first question of the night. Oh, how was your day? My day was pretty good. I hope yours was well too. Got off work early, so came home and took a nice spacious nap. Was able to rest and relax a little bit, feel better, all of that great stuff. And then he is asking, what if modern weapons were invented in BC? Well, then, again, the importance of inventing modern weapons is to make more effective, more efficient, and safer ways to kill other people. Now, what do I mean by more efficient yet also safer? More efficient in the sense that modern weapons, tanks, bombs, missiles, are able to kill a lot more people, and more safe is that they're safer for the people who are using them. So it is much safer to, instead of charging it, you are a much more level of exposure if you are running up with a spear or a sword or a cudgel and trying to hit someone or stab them, than it is when you're in a tank firing from a ways away. Hopefully, you're not in range of the enemy, and you can be perfectly okay. And that's so that is probably why. So the warfare, the modern warfare that is basically born out of the Industrial Revolution and really is fully showcased for the first time in what you guys call World War I and what I consider to be World War II in the 1910s, is actually an example of very, very of the Industrial Revolution creating these more effective killing mechanisms that turned out not to be safe. But there are some weaponries that are safer in the sense that they're safer for the people using them because they can fire them from long range or a longer distance and be a little bit safer. That's why throughout all of human history, projectiles have been a huge part of fighting. Javelins, bows, chariot archers, horse archers made the Mongols and the Huns extraordinarily successful. And of course, now we have things like bombs, missiles, fighter planes, and things like that, because people have always wanted to feel a sense of safety when they are fighting. And so that is why projectiles have always been good, because they have created a level of range and distance where people can use that to better defend themselves in a fight. So that's what's going on there. So, yeah. You could argue that the gun changes everything. The invention and the use, the proliferation of gun weaponry and gunpowder in the 15th and 16th century for the Europeans, because now your main weapon is no longer the sword, which forces close combat. It is now a projectile weapon like a bow or an arrow, So, Russian, basically, that's what it is. You have the development of all types of different weapons that are used in all types of different ways, and a lot of them are very and more weapons that are developed over time become safer and safer for those who are using them in order to keep themselves safe from their enemy. The problem is the enemy also has those weapons, so they're going to use them to fire from far away distances. So there's always been kind of this race of who can get the better technology first and who can utilize it. The English were very successful in the 100 Years' War, especially at first because of their use of longbows, because the longbow allowed for much, instead of a composite or short bow, the longbow allowed for much greater distance because of how far the archer had to pull it back using his two fingers. So anyways, Russian, that's basically a general overview of how those would work. Yeah, so thank you, Russian, I appreciate that. But anyways, we are doing, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and our weekend way to start your weekend Q&A, where we will be talking about all things history, social studies related. If you are interested in that sort of thing, if you're interested in social studies and history, drop a topic, comment, question in the chat, and I will be getting to it as soon as possible. Yeah, Thara, hello, welcome, good to see you. What is your favorite castle you have been to or wanted to go to? I have done 20 in Europe alone, but want to go to not. I'm trying to think of a good one. Well, if you're not interested, just stay around and see what you hear, and maybe something will catch your eye. I've got a lot of people who come in here and are surprised by how interested they are in the way that we talk about history here. So I understand where you're coming from, Octogram, but still. So I wouldn't know it. I wouldn't have I want to visit some of the castles in the Black Forest. Teutoburg, I think, is one of them. I'm trying to think some of the names. I don't know the names off the top of my head. Obviously, I think the German castles are some of the best because you build them in the forest and there's all sorts of incredible things there. Thank you, Thara. I really appreciate that. Consider subscribing too. When did such agencies come to fruition, like the FBI, CIA, NSA? When were these agencies created? So, Seth, very good question. Yes, definitely. If you're interested in Octogram, if you are interested in what you are hearing, leave a like and consider subscribing and ask about something you might be interested in, because chances are I might know something about it. Yep, I did a literal video today about, today is the birthday of Taylor Swift, probably the greatest pop singer, most accomplished pop singer ever, and maybe the greatest pop singer ever. And I made a video about her, and we talk about her. We talk about anyone who's anything or anyone who has had a cultural impact on this channel. We get to talk about. That's what we do here on the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. So, anyways, thank you so much, Simon. But yeah, the FBI is part of what's called the OSS during the 30s and the 40s. And it really got its start in the 30s under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, but it really became, the OSS was the International Spy Espionage Organization that became the CIA. So the OSS was started for the sake of espionage during World War II, and it eventually evolved into the uh, CIA. While the FBI, it really gets its bare bones in the 30s with J. Edgar Hoover, and then by the 1950s, because of the fight against communism, it has become the main chief institution for dealing with justice and criminal issues and things like that. So the FBI starts, and it's really the pet project of J. Edgar Hoover. There are others who started, but he is the one that really took it places and gave it the international recognition that it has, for good and for bad. But basically, the FBI starts in the 30s and really gets going during the Red Scare at the beginning of the Cold War, as Americans are more and more worried about the threat of communism domestically and the spread of communism domestically. The FBI gains more and more teeth, more and more strength, and Hoover gains more and more power. And so that is where the FBI gets its strength. The NSA, I think, is founded in the 80s. If I am correct, it isn't part of the original group. There's also the DEA, which I think is also founded in the 80s. And I think that's all part of the program of the government cracking down on certain things. Obviously, the DEA, it's obviously with the war on drugs, which starts in the 70s but really ramps up into the 90s. In fact, the DEA might have been founded in the 70s by Richard Nixon. So the NSA has become more and more important in recent years, especially with the rise of international radical Islamic terrorism, but wasn't a huge factor. But originally, I believe it was created in the 1980s because of fears of security threats from the Soviets during the end of the Cold War. So I'm so glad you subscribed. I really appreciate it. Okay, let me see. Let me see here. I'm at Ndep. I don't literally say where I am from. I don't go into specifics, but I am an American, as you can probably tell. Yeah. And Simon, my wonderful moderator, who has made many guesses, I do not tell him. I mean, one day he'll find out when we finally meet face to face, which is what I'm naming and claiming. But yeah, Simon doesn't know exactly where I am from. But Emendep, if you have a question about history or social studies, we'd love to see you in the chat asking about that, or at least listening and enjoying what you're hearing. It really helps the channel grow. And we are trying to build up to a legion. We are at 5668, I think. And so the goal is 6,000. We can do it. I've seen live streams jump me from about 90 or 100 subscribers. So a good live stream is all we need. And so far, so good here. I'm liking what everybody's asking and what everyone's enjoying. So anyways, what else was I going to say? It could be. And if you really want to hear more, yes, join the live stream tomorrow. And if you want to hear me talk about the history, obviously you can watch some of the videos on the channel, but I have a live stream on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern where I discuss different historical topics, and I will be lecturing on the history of the Roman Republic, so I think you guys will really appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Are there any significant things that happened in the year 1998? Okay, so 1998, this actually just happened, so there's a few significant things. 1998, I just talked about this yesterday on the channel. I'm talking about pop singers and things like that, and I talk about this stuff all the time. Frank Sinatra dies in 1998 at the age of 82, one of the most important singers and songwriters of the 20th century. So obviously extremely important there. Huge pop icon. The Taylor Swift of the 40s and 50s and 60s, who had this widespread cultural influence and significance. I'm trying to think what else happens. Who's born significant in 1998? There's probably a lot of people who are significant who were born in 1998 who have not made a splash yet. And if you're trying to guess if that's what year I was born, you are wrong. B, I will not say. But more, I believe, I'm trying to think about what movies or huge cultural phenomenons happened that year. The biggest news politically, historically, is the impeachment of President Bill Clinton. The House vote just a few days ago was the anniversary for this. I have a video on that because I do a day in history video. I do who was born on this day and who passed away on this day every day without fail. But basically, in 1998, Clinton was just a few days ago. This is the anniversary of it. Clinton was impeached by the House of Representatives for lying to Congress and on 3 counts, and then the 4th count was added for his affair with Monica Lewinsky, of which he lied to the nation about, and he faced impeachment by the Senate and was eventually acquitted. Yes, Simon, we'll have to do both. We'll have to do both. So, Seth, I'm not sure if there's anything else I can think of right at the moment, but those are some of the things that come to my mind. Do I know any history of India? Yes, I love India. Bharat. That is what the ancient Sanskrit word was for India. That is what Prime Minister Naradi? I always forget his name. Naradari. I think I'm probably butchering that. I apologize, but he is the Prime Minister of India on more of a nationalist front right now, and he is pushing for India to separate itself from any notion of being connected to Pakistan. Now, the reason India is called India is because the first civilization active in that region of the world, in the subcontinent of India, which includes Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, was the Indus River Valley about 2,500 years before Christ. Now, the Indus River Valley people were known for living near the Indus River. The Indus River is in Pakistan. So this effort by the Indians to change it back to an ancient Sanskrit word is to separate themselves from Pakistan, because in 1947, after their occupation of the land ended, the British partitioned, as they did in Palestine, which has caused all the problems between Israel and the Palestinians. They partitioned the land of India and Pakistan, to give the Muslim majority their own land, as they did in Israel, and to give the non-Muslims, the Hindus, or the Jews, if you're looking at Israel, their own land. And that, therefore, the Indus River Valley is technically in Pakistan. The Ganges, I think it's the third largest river in the world, is extremely significant to India. It is actually in the country of India and not just the subcontinent. But yeah, there's a little bit of history for India. I know a lot more than that, but Amdep, that's what I'm talking about right now. So I just wanted to give you a few snippets there. So there's an effort right now to change the name of India back to Bharat, the ancient Sanskrit word, trying to separate themselves from Pakistan, while getting rid of the Indus River Valley, which is what they are named after. So if you like the history you just learned about, if you like what we're talking about, consider liking and subscribing, joining the history. Simon the Bunny. What about 1984? Any particular reason that year was chosen by Orwell? I think there's two reasons that Orwell chose 1984, Simon. First of all, it was a flip. It was an anagram of the year he wrote it in. 1948 becomes 1984. And he also he wrote 1984 as a condemnation of Stalinism in the Soviet Union, and also as a warning about the spread of authoritarian, totalitarianism, fascism, Marxism, whatever you want to call it, some sort of government that leads to dictatorial regimes. And I think 1984 was an anagram, and it was also enough time in the future where you could have this futuristic technology that could be spying on people in such massive ways. So that is why I think Orwell chose 1984. Yes. And yes, I want to go to Mumbai as well. I want to go to India. India is a wonderful country. Punjab. So the Punjab is the region where Sikhism was founded, or at least is predominant, and something that is always important when considering India is that different regions, part of the separation and divisions within India, the country itself, as well as the Indian subcontinent, has been Sikhism, Islam, Jainism, and Hinduism, obviously the largest religion and perhaps the most ancient religion in the entire world, which have often bickered with each other or been on different footing, and has led to divisions along geographic and cultural lines. So Punjab has been a majority Sikh for a long time, and that has put it at odds with both the Muslims in Pakistan, and there's a lot of Muslims still in India. The first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, was a Muslim, and his daughter, Indira Gandhi, who wasn't married to Gandhi or related to Gandhi, but knew him, they were Muslims. There have been many leaders in Indian history, just India the country, not the subcontinent, who are Muslim. But Punjab is where a lot of Sikhs are. Pakistan is where a lot of Muslims are, and then Delhi in the southern area is where you have a large number of Hindus. So, if that's your birth year stuff, so you're in 1998, baby. Well, wonderful. Yeah, Simon, I like to say the British did it because it was the British instructions, and that land was mandated or controlled by the British. So it's technically the UN who partitioned the land. You are correct. And it was a pain in the butt to figure it out. But basically, after World War I, after the British had used the Arabs and other peoples to undermine the Ottoman Empire and basically destroy them in World War I, and there was no more Ottoman Empire, the whole question became, what happens to this land in the Middle East? You have Iran, or Persia, which has been this empire in the past, the Safavids and other things, that eventually was swallowed up by the Ottomans to some extent. You have this middle land, which is now Syria and Iraq. Obviously, a lot of happening in Syria. The French got Iraq and Syria, and they created a mandate, and the British got Palestine and Iran and created a mandate, as well as Saudi Arabia. And a mandate is basically where a country oversees a region of the world, that region, and basically helps them set up their tools for self-government while also creating semi-colonial ties and economic ties to that particular nation. So the British have economic ties in that region of the world. And in 1932, they decide to let Ibn Saud become the king of Arabia, which is why it's called Saudi Arabia and not just Arabia, as it had been known for centuries before, or Nebetia, as the Romans had called it. Meanwhile, the Syria and Iraq eventually gained their autonomy from the French. Well, also, the big thing that everybody loved about these regions was the large amounts of oil that could be exported that created colonial and post-colonial ties to the British and the French. Now, the British also, in 1917, Alfred Balfour, the British foreign minister, released a very small statement in which he declared that the Jews had a right to have a state in the land of Palestine, a Jewish state, because not only for decades had Jews been going back to that region of the world and settling, starting in the 1870s, to escape persecution from people, which the Jews have always unfortunately run into, but also to create a new society and to recognize the ancient ties of the Jews to the land of Israel going back 3,000 to 4,000 years before Balfour's time, basically. And so Balfour declared that, and the British oversaw that land and region, and you had a different conglomeration of different Arab peoples, as well as intermarried peoples from Egyptian and what we would call Jordanian, Lebanese backgrounds. This hodgepodge of different Arab groups that were known as Palestinians. Many of them were Bedouinic. And you had obviously an influx of Jews from Eastern Europe, particularly the Russian Empire, who were sick and tired of persecution. And eventually the UN partitioned the land and created the two-state solution that has not been a solution, where basically the Israelis agreed to give huge amounts of land to the Palestinians, and the Palestinians did not want that. They wanted more of the land. There were different things. And this eventually led in 1948 to the UN declaring Israel was a nation, and this immediately caused the Arab-Israeli War and the start of the Palestinian-Israel conflict that continues to this day, and obviously is why the war in Gaza happens. So, Octagram, if you're still here and you don't think this is interesting and you don't think this is relevant, may I suggest listening to what we just said? And that really, I think, shows that this is relevant beyond just what is happening right now. It stretches from the past to the present and is clearly, and we can't understand our present without looking at our past. So the truth of the matter is, yes, the UN partitioned the land, and the Israelis and Palestinians have never been able to agree on the actual outlook of what that would be, and the dispossession of the Palestinians from large amounts of their land by the Jews what happened soon after that war started, and has continued for a long time, as many Jews were exiled from Arab countries, leading to all sorts of wars, because most of the early wars were not between Palestinian and Jew so much as they were between Jews and other groups such as the Egyptians and the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Jordanians. It's only more recently that the fighting has been specifically between the Jews and the Palestinians themselves. But the first one obviously was in 1948. So, and interestingly enough, the Jews in that region living there in the 40s and the 30s were called Palestinians because they were living in the land of Palestine. Palestine was what the Romans called them because they had displaced the Jews and renamed it based off of a word from the Greek historian Herodotus, Palestina, as a way to mock the Jews and the people of Israel. Because of their ancestral enemy, one of the sea peoples called the Philistines. So the Philistines get renamed in different languages, and obviously I'm using English for all of this, but transliterated and all of that. Philistia becomes Palestinia and Palestine, and that is where the term comes from. So, how long did the Cowboys' days last in America? Seth, so there's two things I'm going to have to tell you, and they may be unfortunate to hear. A, there really weren't that many cowboy days in America. If you're looking at when the West was settled in this slow but steady trickling of pioneers, miners, and of course the creation of large cattle ranches and cattle barons and things like that, and the slow but steady influx of industry and technology into the West, you could say that the golden heyday age is from the end of the Civil War to about 1900. because that's when the Yukon Gold Rush kind of starts to dry up, and that's the last big push in the West, in Alaska and northwestern Canada, the Klondike Gold Rush, in the Yukon Territory of Canada and in Alaska. But the interesting thing is that that era really is not nearly as wild and rough and tumble. What it does, again, history is always showing us something, and what this history shows us is how much we have exaggerated how wild the West actually was. Things were pretty settled. You didn't have people running amok and banditos and things like this as much as you'd like to think. Highwaymen causing things to blow up everywhere. You didn't have that nearly as much as you think you did. You had some sort of law and civility and order. Yes, you had bordellos and brothels and mining and greed and murder and fighting and mayhem, but you didn't have shootouts every time. You didn't have gunfight at the OK Corral. In fact, the gunfight at the OK Corral, which is already heavily exaggerated, stands out because it is a rarer instance of an actual gunfight between lawmen, which you could argue the Earps really weren't, and outlaws, which you could argue the Clanton-McClary gang really wasn't. These were just people competing for influence in the town, and Virgil Earp happened to be the guy who was in charge, who was the sheriff, and he was able to deputize Wyatt and Morgan and Doc Holliday. And these guys, who had experience as lawmen, obviously didn't mean bad, but they were obviously self-interested as anyone else living in the rough and tumble life of Tombstone were. The reason it was called Tombstone was the guy who founded it, who got a silver strike, I'm trying to remember his name, he was told he would only find his tombstone. So, Seth, it wasn't as crazy as we think, and it's a much shorter period than we think. Yes, there's a lot of British influence in Israel, especially in the Jewish areas of Israel. Yeah. And that's interesting. I did not know that. Is my name Luigi? Oh my goodness gracious. No, my name is not Luigi. And let me make something very clear. I don't know why we have to say this. Screwing over people and not giving them the anesthesia they need is wrong. Killing someone because of that is also wrong. Why has our society become, and this just seems to be a malady that's affecting the world over, one way or the other? I just talked about the Israel-Palestine stuff. I know you're making a joke, but I guess I'm going to grandstand just a little bit, Raj. Sorry. On one end, we have this issue where we have you can't be one or the other. You can't have any sort of both middle ground, nuanced perspective. With Israel and Palestine, this is a big problem. I can't say that the Palestinians deserve a state and that they have lived in that land for a long time and have historical and cultural ties to that land without being considered anti-Israel. I can't also say that that Israel has a right to wipe out Hezbollah and Hamas and should be very worried about the Syrian rebels who have proven to be just as anti-Israel as Bashar al-Assad. I can't say that without being anti-Arab or Islamophobic or anything like that. Nonsense. I can be against what Luigi Mangione did and also condemn what Brian Thompson was doing with United Healthcare. So, what about the sequel 1975? I don't know what you mean by that. Are you talking about the band, the 1975? But anyways, first name, friendly, middle name, neighborhood, and last name, history. Yes, and I am not the friendly neighborhood historian, but if you want to be the friendly neighborhood historian, like and subscribe. Oh, you are Sikh. That's amazing. Raj, Muhammad is a false prophet. Okay, so I'm not going to make any religious statements or things like that. I just the history around Muhammad is very, very disturbing in many, many ways. But we must also understand that the history around many famous historical figures of different religious stripes is also disturbing in many, many ways. Muhammad was a warlord who raised an army, conquered cities, married a girl who was underage, and then consummated it when she was just a little bit older. And obviously, Islam spread by the sword because that's how Muhammad had gotten Medina to convert. Yathrib was the name of it before he went back to Mecca and set up his Islamic kingdom there. And that state would eventually become the caliphate of the Umayyads and then the Abbasids, which would control the Middle East, North Africa, and even Spain. Today is the birthday of one of the greatest philosophers in Spanish history, Moses Maimonides, who is also one of the greatest ethicists in Jewish history and who shows the Islamic golden age and the tolerance Islam has shown throughout much of its history, at least in North Africa, the Middle East, and Spain. Despite being from Spain, he eventually died in Egypt and was far more comfortable in the presence of Muslims than he was in the presence of Christians. So, lots of Buddhism being ignored. Yeah, I'm not ignoring it, Gym Leader. The Buddhists in India, Buddhism is an Indian religion. Siddhartha was a Buddhist. Buddhism has had to shift over to Myanmar. Burma was what the British call it when they colonized, mainly because the Muslims show up and exile huge numbers of Buddhists. And that's why when we think of Buddhism, we think of Chinese people or Chinese culture less than we do Indian, even though it is a South Asian religion, not an East Asian religion. So something to think about there. I'm full as possible. Joseph Smith is a false prophet. Joseph Smith. Well, I've talked about that on the channel. I made a video about how Joseph Smith was killed, and I got a lot of flack from Mormons when I said, from people of the LDS faith who don't comment on my videos otherwise, who came on and said that I was misrepresenting a prophet of God because I said that Joseph Smith was not assassinated and he is not a martyr. He died with a gun in his hand. He was hunted down by the men of the town, which vigilante justice, just like Luigi Mangione, is not right. But they hunted him down to kill him because he was a philanderer who was known as a kind of a schemer and a corrupt businessman. So, anyways, Doggy Boy 88, free Tibet. Tibet taken over by the Chinese in the late 1950s. And yes, still a lot of people think they need to free it. Yeah, I wouldn't say that about the Middle East, Luke. There's many beautiful and wonderful things, and the history of the Middle East is just fascinating to me. I love it. I love the Middle East. I'm glad you can second this. I'm glad I'm on the right time. Uh-huh. You met Kamala and she was me. Interesting. The Bible, Luke? Mm-hmm. What can I shut up about? Holi, JHM, are you bringing up the Hindu celebration of Holi? Which is one of their, I think that's at the beginning of the year. It's like right after New Year's. There's a very famous Hindu holiday called Holi. India is quite diverse. Islam and Hinduism, let's say that in southern India came differently through conquest from northern India as compared to Islam reaching by trade to the south. Yeah, that sounds about right. Conquest in the north, trade in the south. This actually happens in Africa, Nithin. In Africa, North Africa is conquered by the Muslims, the Maghreb, as it's known. But sub-Saharan West Africa becomes Muslim, the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires, because of Islamic trade. Now, there's a lot of cultural pressure and fears of Islam absorbing them, just as it is with the Ilkhanate who conquer Persia, the Mongols who conquer Persia. They accept Islam. This isn't without pressure about conversion, but it is without forced violent conversion. I will say that. That is very true. Well, Luke, Persia is the ancient name of the land. Persia is Iran. Iran is what the Europeans renamed it based off the word Aryan, which is what they considered the Indians and Central Asians and Middle Easterners to be. They considered them to be, based on their 19th century social Darwinism, cultural superiority nonsense, they consider them to be inferior types of Europeans. I read an interesting book when I wrote my dissertation. I'll write that one day. When I wrote my master's thesis, there was an interesting book I read from London about that analyzed the inferiorities of Afghan people because of the shapes of their heads and the size of their skulls, noting physiological differences for the purpose of undermining them. But they did believe that they were white, technically, and they are technically Indo-Aryan. These people have been migrating around from Turkey and the Middle East and India all the way to Europe for thousands of years. The Burma campaign in World War II, I would have to do more about that, but I know that the Japanese were very involved in trying to get to India through Burma. Yes, I could do a lot. Let me pencil in doing that next Sunday. Although next Sunday is really close to Christmas, and I might want to talk about the celebration of Christmas. Persia isn't there because of the British and the French. They renamed it. Yes, there are a lot of Sikhs in Britain. That makes sense. They're very nice people. They're generally non-violent from what I understand. And from what I also understand, Sikhism is a amalgamated religion created based on Christian, Hindu, and Muslim principles mixed together. It's a very fascinating religion. And it is extraordinarily peaceful. And I have met Sikhs who are very nice. And I don't want to get to describe this too much because I don't want to sound like I'm culturally insensitive, but usually when you see someone of Indian descent, they are not wearing a turban. If they are wearing a turban and the man has a beard, that is a Sikh, more likely than not. Muslims wear turbans, Indians wear different hats, but the Sikhs wear turbans. And the men are actually instructed to carry things in their turbans. So I have a lot of friends from the independent countries of the old Soviet Union. Can you describe the 90s for such countries like Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan? Well, there's basically a power vacuum that emerges in all of these countries, as in Eastern Europe and as in the big kahuna, Russia itself. And basically, these regions deal with political decay, the breakdown of the old communist apparatchik system, which was bureaucratic, and basically power vacuums. So you could compare it to the decolonized regions of Africa in the 1960s and 70s, where you have kleptocrats, plutocrats, and other bureaucrats seizing as much power and influence as you possibly can, leading to destabilization and further problems that they hadn't even had under communism. Christopher, I'm so glad to hear that. I love history too, and I'm glad you're here. But yeah, Seth, that's what it looked like then. Ariam, you got your name said. This is the first time on YouTube. Yes, I know. I don't know a huge amount about it, but I want to learn more about it. And I don't want to be simplistic again. I love Indian food. I've eaten Punjabi food. Sikhs, if I'm correct, are not vegetarian like many Hindus are, and so they will have meat in their cooking more often than not, like Punjab chicken. I don't know a huge amount, but I'm willing to learn more. Okay, you didn't think that. Okay, good. We're on the same page, Seth. Because you got this influx of technology, Western railroads, Westernization, telegraphs, and of course, yeah, the railroads and eventually the car and electricity. These things are going to quickly outpace the old mining days. Yes, the UK. I've done a series about, if you like learning about the UK, I've done a series about the British kings and queens. I've done a series about the Russian czars, the US presidents, and the Roman emperors. And I did weekly updates on the political election here in the United States because I knew it was going to be historical, and it sure as heck was. I literally saw a post today showing Donald Trump on the cover of Time magazine. He's Time's Person of the Year. And people said how it started with the mugshot and how it's going. A convicted felon, elected president, second non-consecutive term, only happened the second time. This is history. We are living through history. Sup, good to see you, RR. Always great to see you. Yeah, I discuss it from time to time. I'm not from the UK, but I love the British. I love England. I love Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and for that matter, Southern Ireland. Yeah, and R&R, that's true. The slave trade that the Americans are known for, which is known for because it's a race-based slave trade, is actually started to some extent by the Arabs in Africa because Muslims cannot enslave other Muslims, although Shiites and Sunnis enslave each other because they don't consider themselves real, they don't consider their opponents real Muslims, just like Catholics and Protestants sometimes don't consider themselves true Christians. And Orthodox Jews typically do not consider Reform or conservative Jews, which are not Orthodox Jews, to be real Jews, even though they all practice Judaism. That's not even talking about secular Jews. But yes, so the Arab slave trade starts by the Muslims because Muslims can't enslave each other, and the demand for that only increases with the Europeans. Yes, and there is a huge market for slavery, and of course we have sex slavery and human trafficking that has become a huge part of that, and that includes children, and that is all over the developing parts of the world, unfortunately. And of course, we can't pretend that it's not in the developing world in more elaborate, convoluted schemes. I encourage everybody to go watch Sound of Freedom if you don't believe me. You're from York, so you're from the north, but you live in London. I love York. And the Americans, at least the British who colonized America, were not very good at renaming things. So of course we got New York here, but very few people in the United States know that York is the biggest city in northern England, and the region is basically the capital of Northumbria, which was an ancient kingdom. Hey, Mike, great to see you. Manchester, UK. Yep, I know that. I watched Ted Lasso. Great to see you, Underboss. Always so good to see you. Everybody's having a good time. Everyone's happy to be here. Great to see you all. The Kashmir conflict, a little bit, from what I understand, this is the disputed land from the partition of India. So I've been talking about the 1947 partition of India by the British and where they cut up Pakistan and India. And later Bangladesh will join as its own independent country because, again, Muslim majority country. But in Pakistan, but the land in Kashmir is a little area between India and Pakistan that has been fought over a long time between the Hindus and the Muslims. In fact, Hinduism, if you study Hinduism, you find out that Hinduism has a militant side to it, most of it emerging as a response in its religious tradition to Islamic influence and power in India. So when Islam shows up in India by conquest and trade and power and all of these things, Hinduism basically kind of grows a backbone. But at the same time, there's a lot of this jealousy and threat from Islam. At least the Hindus thought that, and there's this ongoing conflict between Hindus and Muslims, and Kashmir is where it happens the most, and it's the most disputed land in the world, basically. You think, other than Palestine. So, but yes, help us build the Legion. Israel was there, though, on Egyptian hieroglyphics by name. I don't agree either way, but it's on. Yes, Christopher, that's true. Israel is the Jews are the descent, or the Israel and the Israelis. They are the original people in that land. I can't think, other than there are no natives, technically speaking, but other than the Native Americans and the Aborigines and the Maori people and many of the Africans, the Israelis there are no people that are more connected to an ancient land than the Jews. And there's a religious connection, there's spiritual significance, cultural significance, and yes, the Maranatha Stele, the Egyptians who had hegemony over that land, the Exodus there's probably some truth to the notion that there was a mass exodus of Israelites from Egypt, the Hebrews as they were called, the Hebrews, which was a term for slave, who exited Egypt and set up an autonomous land, conquered it, and then set up a kingdom that became known as the Davidic kingdom under King David. There is historical evidence for a temple in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago that is Jewish. This is also 1,500 years before Islam, at least. So there's historical evidence of Jews living in the land of what was called Canaan and Israel 2,000 years before Muhammad was even born. Make of that what you, or around the circa. I'm not saying, that doesn't mean, again, it's not either or. That doesn't mean that the Palestinians don't have some sort of right and claim and ability to coexist on the land. I'm an American. The Native Americans lived here for thousands of years, before any white people showed up. Then white people showed up, and the Native Americans died off in huge batches and were dispossessed. I don't think for a second the Native Americans don't deserve to live in this country and have as much land as they need. And I don't believe for a second that automatically means that that whites and other types of Americans, Hispanic and African American and Asian American, don't have a right to live here either. There has to be some ability to share. So you could compare, although it's a rough comparison, white people in America, in the United States, and Africans too, African Americans, who both have a centuries-long and huge cultural commitment to the America, to the Palestinians in some sense. So let's see here. System. If people just knew why Christians around the world are going through, Christians would start organized, hence the media keeps it on. Yeah, Christians are the largest persecuted religious group in the world. It's not close. It is not Jews, and it is not Muslims. It is true that many of the victims of radical Islamic terrorism have been Muslim, unfortunately, but it is also true that the biggest group of people that are persecuted in the world, and this might be because they're the largest, I would have to look at it proportionally, but the data I have seen indicates the Christians are more highly persecuted, which is already stunning because nobody thinks that. Yes, and some Christians, because of this, want new crusades, and that was a disaster, so don't do that. Although the crusades are far more new, everything in history is far more nuanced than it looks. The crusades are not just Christian aggression against Muslims, they just weren't successful. Yeah. Daniel, good to see you. Was JFK assassinated by the CIA? That's what RFK Jr. claims, and I know a lot of people think RFK is a little loopy, and I tend to agree. But, I think there's a lot of history there that's interesting because again, history is telling us something. And the history around the JFK assassination conspiracies, where people would not accept the Warren Commission's findings that it was a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, are proof what a deep scar this was on the nation's psyche, and how hard it has been for Americans to live down this horrible, devastating loss. By the time Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King are killed, Americans are used to assassinations in the 60s, but there was something culturally that changed. There was this innocence broken and shattered when JFK was shot, and I think Americans haven't been able to live that down, just how horrific this was. On live TV, the President of the United States has his head blown open. That's just too much for people. And I can't even watch it. It makes me physically ill when I see it. It just because I know the psychological and historical weight of that assassination on the American people. From what I have, so I think the conspiracy theories are just people refusing to accept the possibility that it was just one man who was loony and hated him. There is some evidence, though, to the contrary, that there was possibly an assassination attempt, and I've talked about it before. There's three major theories. I have an entire live stream about this, but one, he was killed by the mafia, who had helped him supposedly win the 1960 election. Then, when his brother started investigating them, because the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover refused to acknowledge that there was a mafia, because the mafia had incriminating photos of Hoover molesting children. True story, by the way. When Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, went after the mafia supposedly retaliated and killed him. Jack Ruby, the guy who shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald a couple days later, was a nightclub owner with ties to the mafia. So that's a possibility there. At the same time, the second theory is the CIA one, that the CIA and the military-industrial complex upset that Kennedy had messed up the El Bayo de Cochinas, the Bay of Pigs, or what we call the Bay of Pigs, where Cuban counter-revolutionaries had tried to overthrow Castro's communist government. I'll try saying that 3 times fast. The CIA upset by that, and upset by the fact that he had let the Berlin Wall be built, and feeling that he had brought the America too close to nuclear war against the inferior Soviet Union superpower, targeted and killed him so they could put a president in there who would be more stern on the communists, particularly with the growing issue of Vietnam. Kennedy did not want to get the U.S. involved in Vietnam. President Johnson, his successor, his vice president, did so in astounding and obviously embarrassing fashion. So Kennedy actually was, that's a possibility. The third theory is that Kennedy was assassinated by the workings of his vice president, Lyndon Johnson, who wanted to become president. And this theory is often married with the second theory, where Johnson worked with the military-industrial complex and the CIA, basically where he promised to go into Vietnam and they promised to make him president. So thank you, I Love Music, for subscribing. And Vincent, good to see you. But yeah, Daniel, those are the theories about Kennedy's assassination. I don't know if any of them are true. I'm going to say this, just going on a limb here. I've been studying this my whole life. I've been studying the U.S. presidents for 20 plus years, since I was very little. The truth of the matter is, at this point, I can't say it was a lone gunman anymore. I can't say it was Lee Harvey Oswald. There's just too much in the story. The analysts have said that that he could not have gotten off those shots in that way. The angle was all wrong. I'm not going to get into grassy knoll stuff and things like that. I'm not going to go all X-Files, although I love that show. I love anything paranormal or conspiratorial. I watch this stuff all the time. But the truth of the matter is, I don't think that Kennedy was, I think that at this point we have to investigate and be open to the idea that Kennedy was killed by more than just one man. And perhaps Oswald was a patsy, or perhaps he was hired, or he was just set up. Who knows? But I'm saying we have to seriously consider that. Maybe opening the JFK files is a possibility. I was just reading that former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned Donald Trump to ignore RFK Jr., who was insisting they declassify the Warren Commission's findings. Which could create another emotional scar that I will be talking about on this live stream in 10 years because of its historical significance. So, yeah. I love JFK. He's a great president. I have several videos on him. I've talked about his assassination. I have a video about his wife's life in Aristotle Onassis. I've talked about the Kennedys. I really respect them in some ways. Other ways, I don't respect them because they could be terrible people. But I really like JFK as a person, and I think he is a great example of potential loss, but also of the ability to grow. He goes from being this weekend boy who's pushed around with the Bay of Pigs and the Berlin Wall to standing up and saving the world from nuclear annihilation. And who knows what he could have done had he lived. That's obviously the biggest what if perhaps in American history, other than if the South had won the Civil War, or at least got a stalemate where they were allowed to survive. Yeah. Yeah, let me see here. I don't 100% know. And if I don't know, I'm not going to say. If I do know, I'll say. And if I don't know, I'm going to say I don't know because I'm willing to learn. Did you like George Mason? Do you know who George Mason is? Yes, Shannon, I know who George Mason is. Obviously one of the founding fathers, an anti-federalist who opposed the ratification of the Constitution, believed radically in states' rights and wanted to keep the Articles of Confederation, which basically had not worked. And at that point, none of the founders were on board with him. Hi, how are you? Good to see you, Nazima. From South Africa. Great place. I just did a video about Nelson Mandela and another one of my favorite historical figures. I'm trying to talk as factually as I possibly can. Yeah, Christopher, you're referring to the Battle of Tours where the Muslims attacked and Charles Martel, the Hammer, the grandfather of the great Charlemagne, pushed them back at the Battle of Tours or Poitiers in 732, which ends the century of conquest. From 632 to 732, Islam spreads through conquest unchecked, destroying the Sassanid Persian Empire, weakening severely the Byzantines by taking all of North Africa, including Egypt, which was the breadbasket, and obviously the Middle East, Palestine, and large parts of Turkey. They take over Spain, renaming it Al-Andalus. Then they get into France, and Charles Martel, who sends them out running. A lot of historians have speculated that perhaps they only wanted to raid and gain supplies. There was nothing to indicate from the last century of Islamic conquest that the Muslims meant any such thing as raiding and pillaging. They are not Vikings, they are conquerors. So anyways, and then there's the Kurdistani people, which we haven't talked about, who are technically Aryans too, who don't have their state, and a lot of people are wondering when they're going to get theirs, just like Tibet gaining its independence, which is what the Indians want. Yeah, a lot of people profess lies, but not here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. So Knockout, I'm glad you found us. We do our best, and if we are wrong, we say we are wrong. I mean, I did a video about the Munich Olympics of 1936 and how the Nazis showed off, obviously knowing later that it was the Berlin Olympics of 1936 and the 1972 Munich Olympics is something else. I don't know what information. Yeah, I know a little bit about the Sikh guru. I think I don't know a lot about Sikh religious beliefs and theology, but I'm trying to remember the name of the guru who founded it. I was just reading about him the other day. I do my best. Yeah, I've been reading a little bit about your Uncle Underboss. I want to read more Donatus, Yuzo Beki Okororu. I looked a little bit into him. I want to look more. That's a kleptocratic region. There's a lot going on there, so... And yeah, somebody called me racist. Simon, it's not a live stream until somebody calls me a racist, bigot, right-wing nutjob, or left-wing lunatic, which people call me all the time, which means I must be doing something right. Yes, England does have a lot to answer to. Interesting. Many Sikhs are indeed vegetarian. That would make some sense. Yeah, I'm not doing my doctorate yet, but I want to. Ah, there you are. See? The Sikh normally has a Durgas Wili permitted for carry. Interesting. Yeah, the knife, right? I will look into that, Underboss. I'm sorry I haven't so far. I've just been so busy. He always says some people call him a right-wing insult or a left-wing nutjob, and so he must be doing something right. Yep, that's true. I just said it. I'm way behind in the chat, I can tell. Real Sikhs never eat meat. Okay, so I was wrong about that. So I stand corrected. That's funny, Hulk Hogan. I love Chuck Norris jokes. How do I feel about short people? I'm assuming you're referring to me. I am tall. I think I love short people. All the women I've ever dated have been short for the most part, so nothing to say there. Most human beings throughout history, if we're going to talk about it historically speaking, have been short. Jesus, Napoleon, we all talk about Jesus, Muhammad, Gandhi. These people are short, especially in more ancient history. Excuse me, real fast. But if you're thinking about like Napoleon, who we all know is short, Wasn't short. He was average height for that time. And nutrition wasn't as good, healthcare wasn't as good, so people didn't grow as tall. It wasn't because they were all drinking coffee, which stunts the growth. Which I drank coffee at 12, I'm fine, so don't worry about that. But Napoleon, that was the British cartoons, which really emerged at that time, mocking him and trying to make everybody hate him. So they created this fake image and idea of Napoleon being short. Isn't that interesting? I have a video about that, by the way. I do a historical myths and did you know sometimes in history. Not all the time, kind of sporadically. Try to do at least once a week, but I've been so busy. So, yeah, Fidel, I've heard that. Gandhi isn't a great guy. He had very sexist and racist views. He fought to keep the caste system in India. He went on a hunger strike because the Indian government wanted to remove the caste system. And that's not a good system because that's a social classes system based partially on skin color that does do a lot of discrimination against Indians in Hindu culture. Tell them about the first Christian emperor. Are you referring to Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor in the early 300s, who really didn't convert to Christianity until his last moment, but had used it to gain power and prestige, winning the Battle of the Milvian Bridge because he supposedly saw a Christian symbol in the sky, put it on the shields of his soldiers, then won the battle the next day, organized the Council of Nicaea to recognize the divinity of Christ across the Christian church, and of course, whose mother traveled around the Middle East collecting religious relics such as the cross of Jesus Christ. That guy? Oh, wait, I did it. Sebastian, good to see you. Yep, that's what I do. Oh, wow. Simon, you did a lot on that. I would like to know about that. Perhaps you and I can talk about that more privately some way. Who was the first pope? Who invented the Christian faith? Okay, so that's a good question. I love that question. So in Catholicism, the first pope is Peter, a fisherman who ran a business, who's probably a little bit on the older side, who was one of Jesus's apostles and the leader of the apostles and the most talkative of them if you've read the Gospels. Obviously, the founder of Christianity is Jesus of Nazareth, who was a carpenter, or at least trained as a carpenter, and a rabbi who had a following of disciples, men and women, who were loyal to him, and who was eventually killed by the Romans at the insistence of some of the Jewish leaders through crucifixion, which was a form of public execution. And his followers believe that he rose from the dead 3 days later. That's the historical understanding of it. That's what Tacitus and Josephus, the most ancient of historians, say, who are not Christians. At least Tacitus was not. Josephus was a Jew who may have become a Christian later on in his life. But basically, Jesus of Nazareth was the founder of the Christian religion, and that's what I'm always going to say. I'm not going to say that Constantine or anyone else invented it. That's nonsensical. There were hundreds of thousands, there were millions of Christians in the Roman Empire. They were the fastest growing religion by the time Constantine showed up. How can he invent something that already has millions of adherents, many of whom had faced persecution and death for centuries because of their belief in Christ? So, and the reason for this wasn't because Christianity, not to say that there weren't people who believed, the Romans really didn't care about Christianity. They didn't care that people believed that Jesus of Nazareth was God. They cared that that the Christians believed he was the only God and that they would never let Caesar be God the way that they would let Christ be God. So the Catholic Church, the Christian tradition, Orthodox Christianity, these traditions were already there by the time Constantine showed up. And here's a little Christmas history for you as a bonus. St. Nicholas of Myra was a leading bishop in the Christian church in the early 300s and was known from Turkey. He was known for making toys for poor children in the area and for his charitable works and passion for the poor. And he obviously is inspiration, jolly old St. Nicholas, for Santa Claus. And at that Council of Nicaea that Constantine called, he actually punched out the Christian heretic Arius because he denied the divinity of Jesus Christ. So Santa actually punched out a guy. I have a video on that. It's a meme video. I do history memes once a week. Check that one out. But yes, I'm not going to say, because it's nonsense, that Constantine created the Christian religion. Did he codify it? Did he give it legitimacy? Yes. He legalized it with the Edict of Milan in 312, and basically that allowed Christians to practice without the fear of persecution. And despite the fact that Julian the Apostate in the 360s, another Roman emperor, tried to undo all of that, by 380, Theodosius, a devout Christian, made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. Yeah, I hope it did not get deleted. Yes, of course we can say no to awful things. Yes. Oh, 3/4 of the way, and we're at 59 minutes. So we've been going for quite some time. Let me see. What are my thoughts on the Jews? I've already talked about that. Yeah, type it again. I would like to read it and answer it, Seth. I have all messages on, so I don't know. Maybe it got deleted or something like that. I don't know. Christopher F. Utter is asking about the Holodomor. This is the genocide you don't know about. This is when Stalin killed between 5 and 6 million people, Ukrainian and Russian peasants, starving many of them to death, murdering them and their families, destroying their land and seizing their crops so he could put them on collective farms in the 1920s and 30s. Nobody talks about it. Anne Applebaum has, and she has a great book on it, the Soviet famine, I think it's called, the Red Famine. Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, but to be fair, yes, Trump is Times Man of the Year, and so was Hitler. But Obama was Times Man of the Year. Do you want to compare Obama with Hitler? I mean, he drank water. I mean, I remember the Nazi rally in 1939. I don't remember it, but I've read about it because I'm a historian. And them comparing Trump's rally there with that one is absurdity. Here's the problem. If you have a problem with a political leader like Trump and the way he behaves or what he says or what he's going to do, don't over exaggerate it because you create sympathy for him and his ideas. If you really want to destroy that ideology, deal with it in its own context. Don't go to "you're Hitler" when he's clearly not Hitler. He's not Hitler-esque. He's not fascistic. He's not a dictator. He might have power. He might be power hungry, and he might be blatantly power hungry. But all politicians, or very many politicians, are power hungry to one degree or another. Be careful the way you use that phraseology, because Lincoln, by that word, would be a power hungry dictator. Understand the context of when these historical figures lived, and don't just focus on they act like this, therefore they're a dictator, therefore they're Hitler. That jump in logic is absurd to me. And besides, if Trump is any dictator, he's Mussolini, not Hitler. Anyways, I digress. Let me see here. Friendly Neighborhood Historians membership cards and decree. Yeah, I would love to make Friendly Neighborhood Historian shirts or Friendly Historian with a smiley face. Do this, have a nice day or have a history day or something like that. Trevor, I've talked about the CEO killer. No, he has nothing to do with the Jews. I just love it. No matter where I am on the internet, I can find somebody with ideas about the Jews that are totally irascible and nonsensical. Yes, and Trevor, I may ridiculously disagree with you about what you just said, but you are allowed to say it, and that's what we're here for. That's what Simon just pointed out. We are free speech absolutists here on the channel. Yeah, thank you, Fidel. I do my best to be a walking encyclopedia. And Christopher, yes, there is some portion where government has power and grabs more and more of it. If you want to learn more about the Roman Republic, join us on Sunday for the live stream lecture. I'm going to try to catch up on these chats because I know I'm way behind, so I'm going over. You need solid arguments against your aunt. Well, no, the burden of proof is on your aunt, Trevor. Let me see here. You need evidence. When you are trying to prove something, this is just logic. I can't say, you don't prove a negative. I can't prove to you that I'm not Luigi Mangione. But I can prove to you that I am myself. You don't prove a negative. You don't prove a false statement. Can you tell me you're not this? No, you have to show me what you are. You have to prove what you are. Burden of proof, it's called. Yes, tyranny under any power is an abuse. And yes, Campus, this is that 70s show. I'm a old hat and I like my nostalgia. Okay. I'm sure you're hotter than me, good boy. I'm not here to be hot, I'm here to do history. Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy. He says, yes, he said so, but are we going to trust him if he is the murderer of a U.S. president? Remember who Lee Harvey Oswald was. He was a communist and a dissident. I'm not saying he did kill him or he didn't kill him. I'm saying that it's still very possible that at the end of the day, Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy. I am from the U.S. I don't go into more detail about where I am. In fact, in the earlier live streams, I tried to not even say that I was from the US, but with my accent and everything, you can probably tell I'm an American. Yeah, it does head the same way. There is some truth to that. I'm I'm good. Let me see here. Seth, it's disgusting what the rich are capable of getting away with, but once we find out the whole might of the world is against them. Yeah, that's partially true, but it's also disgusting what anyone can get away with at any time. Mangione has been turned into a hero when he is no such thing. Brian Thompson is not a hero, and very few people are lionizing him the way they're lionizing Mangione. Yeah, I'm keeping him as best I can, and Simon's doing a great job. Show some love for Simon the Bunny, my moderator. He's doing an amazing job. Do you know why the British left North America? A, they got beat in the American Revolution, so they left the United States. B, Canada got its independence. I would argue, Daniel, that World War II starts in 1914 because that's when World War I, and I think that's World War II because the 7 Years' War in the 1750s, also called the French Indian War, is World War I in my opinion. But if we're talking about World War with the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese, which technically that was World War II as well, that war starts in 1937 when the Japanese invade China in the Second Sino-Japanese War. And today is the anniversary of when the Chinese took Nanjing, which I talked about in last week's live stream about Japan in World War II. And that's a very sad story what happened. 300,000 people were slaughtered in some of the worst war crimes ever. Just imagine how bad it was. I can't even speak of some of the things. So let me see here. Global. British troops in Rev War were American born. Some of them were. You're thinking of royalists then. Yeah, no sharks in the Colosseum. They weren't sharks. They did put water in. The Romans did put water in their amphitheaters, Simon, and fill them with sea wars and fish sometimes, but not sharks, from what I understand. And the way ancient, and we talked about this at the beginning of the live stream when it talked about how modern technology has allowed more projectiles and more space and more safety for people who are shooting and using weaponry. Ancient naval warfare didn't use cannons or shells or even catapults. They would ram each other. Or they would try to set fire to each other with flaming arrows. But triremes and biremes are what the Romans called them, and they would slam. And a bireme had 2 levels, and a trireme had 3 levels, and they would slam into each other, and then their soldiers would board the ship and kill the enemy, or they would sink the ship. It would be stuff like that. So that was how they fought each other, and that was done in the amphitheaters and the Colosseum many, many times. Thank you, Christopher. I do my best to be as fair as possible. Z, I don't take that as an insult when you ask that, but no, I am not on the spectrum. There are many wonderful people on the spectrum who can go just as fast as I can. So in some ways, I take that as a compliment. Thank you, Underboss. Yeah, I mean, I just do I know a lot, and I think Simon, I think the reason people wonder about that is because I know a lot, and I'm able to kind of go on end without stopping, and I'm just running at the mouth almost. And so people might think, wow, he's obsessive about this. I just really love it, and I just have a good memory. I don't take it as an insult. Yeah, and Asperger's is technically on the spectrum, and that has to do with social behavior and things like that, and other things. I don't and fixations and obsessive compulsiveness. I don't believe I have Asperger's either. I do my best to be the most informed historian possible. Gandhi was not a good man. Neither was Nelson Mandela or Mother Teresa. They were terrible. Okay, Christopher, yeah, I know what you're referring to. The fraud from Mother Teresa. Mandela's the necklacing of the African National Congress, where they put a tire around someone's head and set them on fire. I know that. And Gandhi obviously being a racist. It's tough because yes, you're right, but at the same time, you're not right. And I'm not right either. The truth of the matter is, how do we understand their impact on history? What did they do for the world? What are they known for? What was their impact? They are victims of their time, and they don't always do the right thing. And I would rather look at all of their body of work rather than focus on lionizing them, or focusing on, hey, this gotcha where, hey, Mother Teresa isn't great because here's why. I get it, but I get both sides. I get both of it, and that's what we're supposed to do here. So, Yes, thank you for subscribing and supporting the channel. We really appreciate it. Christopher, I appreciate you. Yeah, Jesse, Christianity as we mean it today, I would argue that the early Christians believed that Jesus of Nazareth was God and that he was crucified and rose on the third day. St. Paul, who is an agreed upon historical figure even by the most strident of atheists, wrote in the 50s AD, 20 years after Jesus' life and death, which is an extremely early account for an ancient source, that Jesus was crucified, seen by many, resurrected, all of that stuff. It's in the book of the Corinthians. And so I think that that the early Christian community did believe that. And interestingly enough, if you study the text source and the history of Christianity and the original sources of it, yes, it's fantastical. Yes, it has, the miracles of Jesus, the resurrection, all of these things, and it sounds fantastical and over the top. But if you study any history of any ancient figure or any ancient historian, Herodotus, Thucydides, Tacitus, they write about the gods. Suetonius writes about the gods. It's not just straight history. They include miracles, mythology, fantastic events. Josephus, when he describes the destruction of Jerusalem in his history of the Jewish wars, who is a monotheist, describes God getting involved in the conflict and fire from heaven and things like this in the Jewish war. So it is common in ancient history to have these fantastical things in them. It's not the Gospels get a lot of crap for that, but the Gospels are just doing what any other historical origin would do, and the Gospels should be seen as biographies. So, I love music. I'm sure Simon answered you, but I want to answer you personally because I'm so glad you're here and have subscribed. We do this live stream every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, Saturday at 7, and Sundays at 4 is the live stream lecture. So join us tomorrow for more Q&A. Yeah, that's funny. Global, I like that joke. Do you think 9/11 played a factor in the decline of the U.S.? Yes, I think the U.S. got overly involved in the Middle East, and I think that a lot of people, I think the United States messed up in Iraq and Afghanistan with regime changes and exporting democracy. And everybody was dancing in the streets when Assad fell 2 weeks ago. Everybody was thrilled. And then the next day, and in the recent days, it's come out that the guy who is running the Syrian rebels is on the FBI most wanted list and is a murderer and a terrorist and all sorts of things. This isn't, when you get rid of a regime, when you have a regime change, what do you replace it with? And the instability in Libya because the Americans got rid of Gaddafi, the disruptions in Egypt. Egypt would not let Palestinians into Egypt when Israel was bombing Rafah because they were worried about Hamas working with the Muslim Brotherhood to overthrow the Egyptian government. And that's all because of the Arab Spring. That's all because the U.S. poked its nose where it shouldn't have been. The U.S. under George W. Bush did not understand the principles of the Middle East, and I think it's unfair for us to retroactively just hate George W. Bush for that and not realize that we haven't learned from history. Like Hegel said, we learn from history that we don't learn from history. We've made the same mistake possibly with Syria because all the rebels that were in Syria were backed by the United States, and I think the United States overextended itself. It hurt its public image. It hurt its economy. It weakened its prestige, and I think it has hurt the U.S. overall. And I think if the United States has been on a bum record ever since Vietnam of intervening in other places. Well, yes, Jesse, there are many different Christian sects and groups. If you go back then, there were only a few. And really, I don't want to say there's tens of thousands of different Christian sects, denominations, because if you look at it, that includes Methodists of different stripes, like the Free Methodists and the United Methodists, and there's another type of Methodist. That includes all the different Baptists. The denominations are still Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Anglican, and all of that. There's probably around 100. But there's thousands of offshoots from those 100. So, yes. Well, yes, I don't think that the values do come later. Exactly. Yeah, that might be fun to collaborate with somebody else, Global. We'll try to do that. I'm a historian, so I agree. Christianity is awesome because there's a lot of history there. And there will be one at 7. We will see you there. I love music. And let me see. I'm trying to get to the bottom of the chat. I find it hilarious when they are compared with each other. They are not even close. Yeah, most people love to demonize their enemy And when you demonize someone and you go too far, you only create sympathy for that person. It's a psychological response by people. Yes, that's true. Sever and mofo. I can't disagree. Lincoln got rid of habeas corpus and imprisoned people against their rights. FDR was a dictator, and I don't think FDR is a great person anyways, but FDR imprisoned people and interned the Japanese. Did not sign land-child lynching legislation because he didn't want the Southern Democrats to turn against him. Every president in war has assumed powers he didn't have, but that doesn't make FDR and Lincoln Hitler. Come on, proportionality. Hitler was more left-wing, by the way. Mussolini was right-wing. Yeah, Hitler called himself a socialist. I've gotten a lot of flack from people for saying that, but Hitler did call himself a socialist. It was just, what kind of socialism do you want? And a lot of people have said, well, he hated communism. Well, of course he hated communism, but if you read the Soviet Union's history during the 1920s, it's dishonest for someone to say, well, Hitler couldn't have been a socialist or a left-winger because he hated communism. That's not a good enough argument. He might have, but the truth of the matter is, if you look at Stalin, he hated communists, and communists hated him. That's why Lev Kamenev and Bukharin and Kirov and, of course, Trotsky were all hunted down and killed by Stalin's regime. Yeah, Chris, I love that idea. We should get that. That would be great. Yeah, let me see here. A one-off 60-second special. A rapid fire. If I had all of the chat just in front of me, I could do that. And I try to answer quickly. I do talk very fast, so. Yeah, just a guess. I don't reveal my age, but I appreciate what you're saying, music. Just come for the hot, stay for the history. Yes, I've gotten many compliments. I mean, some guy earlier was saying that I am good looking enough for certain activities, so whatever. I think people are just so fed up with our system and our corporations. I'm not saying I fully agree, but that's why. Yeah, people sometimes give in to very atrocious things. Technically, he is talking about chat that is fine. Yes, technically, I am stuck in the past. Global, you are right. 730, I think it's unit 731. You're referring, Christopher, to the the Japanese using Chinese POWs for horrible experiments similar to what Mengele did with the Jews at Auschwitz. There, I answered that in like 10 seconds. Oh boy, I'm so sorry, Simon. It is getting late. We need to wrap this up. Shark is, let me see. Hello, good to see you. If you're not on the spectrum, I'm not chronically addicted to oxygen, pal. Unfold your legs soon. It's bad for your curriculum, for your circulation. Okay. There. Okay, now I'm done. All right, so, anyways, yeah, I try to just do it at home. I'm doing this at home. I'm relaxing. I'm just enjoying myself. I'm holding my foot, just a nervous tick, just doing my thing. How long this Constitution took to write? Surprisingly, only a few months, and James Madison writes the bulk of it. Louis, I'm glad you're here, by the way. So great to see you. Okay. Corn Plum, let's talk about Jewish atrocities towards Gentiles and Muslims. Okay, I will talk about Jewish atrocities towards Gentiles and Muslims. Okay, I'm done. A religion that doesn't proselytize, which Judaism very rarely proselytizes, doesn't have a track record of violence. Religions that proselytize heavily have a track record of violence. So, anyways, my background is I'm a historian, and this is where I answer Q&As about history, and hopefully you are enjoying it. I believe he existed. I'm not going to talk about my personal beliefs about religion or the spiritual life. Yeah, the U.S. supported the Syrian rebels because the U.S. can't help itself but be stupid. Let me see. So, let me see. That's not true. Israel didn't create any of these things. I think can you give me an example of white slavery? Okay, Daniel, we'll stop here because I think, Simon, I don't know how much is left, but Daniel asked a great question about white slavery, and we're at 80 minutes, and I want to I know that you, Simon, it's 2:30 and I feel so bad for you. I'm so sorry. And hopefully you got everyone who's going out and partying later. Stay safe and all that fun stuff. Like and subscribe. Become a friendly neighborhood historian. Join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. And Simon, I will be done by, what is it? It'll be 1, I think. Okay, so Daniel, can you give me an example of white slavery? So yes, I can. During the Barbary pirates in the Maghreb, what I was talking about, North Africa, during the 17 and 1800s, enslaved tens of thousands of white men. They would capture ships and enslave the whites that they found on these ships that would be traveling and trading in the Mediterranean, and made them Islamic slaves. There were over 1 million white slaves captured over the century span by the Ottoman Empire and enslaved just in the Mediterranean region alone, not to mention all the white slaves that were made in southeastern Europe, in the Balkans, by the Ottoman Empire, men who were made eunuchs and worked in the castles, some who became very prestigious and important, others who became military elite fighters called janissaries, but it was very common for white slavery to happen. And of course, if you wanted an example before that, the whites were enslaving each other until they got the serfdom system in the early Middle Ages. So ancient whites would enslave each other all the time. If you read stories about the Dark Ages or the early Middle Ages, slavery was common. Serfdom replaces it as they create a feudal system in what's called the High Middle Ages. So yes, there have been millions and millions of slaves. It is not from the word Slav. That is a historical myth. It is based on the another word, diakaki, which is the term for the Greek term for it. But anyways, so I hope I'm going to have to end it there because we're at 80 minutes and I went way over trying to catch up on this chat, which I don't think I did, but I did my best. And I'm so sorry if you didn't have your question answered. Please come back tomorrow. I'll do my absolute best to answer your question. I'm so glad to see everybody. All the support and love means so much to me. We're growing, and even if we grow slowly, I just love doing this. I just love being around, answering questions, getting good feedback and comments and good vibes and all of that stuff. I'm not greedy. I'm not impatient. I'm doing my absolute best. And I know Simon is too. He's such a wonderful moderator. Please give him some love in the chat. And come back tomorrow. Ask any questions you may have about any historical topic you are interested in. And I will be sure to get to it. And consider liking, subscribing, telling all your friends and family, all of that great stuff. Become a friendly neighborhood historian by subscribing, and it's easy as done. And I will see all of you guys tomorrow. We will be here at 7 p.m. Really, really looking forward to it, and I really, really appreciate all of you. And hopefully I am not, Crystal, hopefully I am not one of those horrible historians. I've scrolled down to the bottom of the chat. Take care, and I will see you guys tomorrow, 7 p.m., and hopefully Sunday for that live stream lecture on the Romans starting at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a great night, and take care. Bye-bye.